the most risky thing that you could do ever, period, for your health and well-being and longevity is to not move at all, period. So like the more sedentary somebody is, the more at risk we can become.
Welcome to the Best Hour of Their Day podcast with your hosts, Jason Fernandez
and me, Jason Ackerman. With more than 20 years in the business,
as both coaches and affiliate owners,
our passion is to help create world-class affiliates
and coaches by building
better boxes. Welcome to
the Best Hour of Your Day.
Pop quiz, 2 level 4s, 2 seminar
Hold on,
staff.
are you finally admitting that you're not a level 4?
No, I'm addressing you two.
You got it, guys. This is it.
I'm addressing.
Confession, it just happened.
I'm the most tenured level 4 on this podcast. Pop quiz.
Hot shot.
No cheating. What is CrossFit?
Just the straight definition.
Oh, the fact that
Constantly very functional movements executed high intensity.
Is that right?
It is.
Okay.
That's what we're going to talk about today. Because as you both know, you've both delivered the What is CrossFit lecture.
Many times.
Many times. Let's think about it from that perspective first. What's unique about CrossFit is all of these definitions. From defining what the methodology is to fitness to many other things that prior companies, prior fitness regimes haven't done. But before we define CrossFit, oftentimes you'll have to explain to someone what CrossFit is to get them to come into the box. What are some of the ways you've done that? Because as we talk about at seminars, constantly very functional movements executed at high intensity will scare people away. It's confusing. So what are some of the ways you've helped people understand what CrossFit is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first acknowledgement you have to have there is it's just like you need the definition, but it is wildly verbose if I'm trying to have a casual conversation with somebody. Like, they're just gonna be like, oh, great, thanks for your time. I'll talk to you later, right? Like, see you later, nerd. So you can't lead with that, but that is which we reference in the level 1, which is like, that is a very important component of the methodology, which is defining terms, which were either done very poorly or not done at all prior to Greg writing What is Fitness in 2002. So I've tried it in many ways, and the best way is just to get people to come in. Like, Absolutely. I'd be curious because you've not been in the affiliate for
Best Hour CrossFit. I'm there most days.
Quite some time in an actual affiliate, but how many years are you guys here?
We just hit 10 years at Mafia.
Okay, so between the two of us, you're talking 25 years of doing this. That is a large gap to bridge in a casual conversation, and I would argue you shouldn't even try to bridge that gap in that initial conversation. It's not worth it. You will lose the opportunity to integrate that person and change their life if you try to just douse them with the level 1 kernel and why it's so valuable. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you 100%. I think that going down the road of like the definition and try to berate people with like the definition of certain things or give them the really specific or anything that is sciencey, it kind of dilutes what the whole point of the thing is, which is to get them in the door in the first place, especially as an affiliate owner, and to expose them to the methodology in a way that meets them right where they're at, right? And so like, I think that the context around what is CrossFit is like, well, what are your goals? Where are you at right now? And how can I fit that? And whom are you? And getting to know somebody a little bit and kind of like ask one more question a little bit, and then see what do we know about what CrossFit is and how does that fit into that equation for them? And that might mean, oh man, I want to do something really hard. And you're like, oh, I got something hard for you. Come hang out. Or I need to lose some weight and I feel like my stamina or my endurance stinks. And it's like, okay, I can come work out at the gym with me. I can help you with that.
Yeah, basically any problem you present, we've got the solution.
We do, yeah. And it's just, but if you don't know what the problem is that they're trying to solve right now, then we can't answer that with CrossFit because we can solve the problem.
Yeah, I think there's 2 components to that. One is I think the understanding of the methodology at a pretty deep level helps you create clarity with whatever their problem is, right? So I think in order to answer something in a very concise manner, A, you have to know what this is about, and then B, you have to match that with whatever their problem is. So an example was, or would be, again, Sherwood has a way with words, and I heard him say years ago, you know, when you're talking about high intensity, there's an automatic assumption by many people when you say high intensity that equates to maximal or 100%. And he's like, well, let's back this up a little bit. If there's a high, let's assume there's a medium and then there's a low. So conservatively, we could say high intensity would be 70% or higher, roughly. And you're like, oh, that's a much simpler layman's terms way to communicate this idea of high intensity, that they have already created this picture in their mind of what that looks like because of what they've seen on the internet or on the CrossFit Games, or their person that they met who told them that they should call me, who is in the honeymoon stage and is full-blown CrossFit, you know, gear nerd now. You have to be able to take all of that and be like, here's what that means. Like, here's the bottom line up front, like simplest version of that whole thing, which is like, hey, it just means like working out pretty hard on a regular basis.
I like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
let's take a step back. We'll come to intensity, but let's start just like we do at seminars, and let's talk about functional movements. Because flip through the channels late at night. I don't know if anyone does that anymore.
I don't think so. I kind of miss those days though.
Remember though, like 2 a.m. Infomercials. What was
Exercise equipment stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Tony with the long hair, ponytail, he's on the Gazelle.
Yeah,
There's
right.
there's the plate that you stand on and you just twist.
The
Well, there's
vibrating
that
plate.
one, the vibrating one too.
The vibrating belt.
Like
That
the old
might be a
school.
different channel. I don't know.
You ever go to like a museum?
Okay.
They'll have like the shaker, like
Yep.
where you, like the belt around you. But point is, all of those will claim to be functional. And we talk about that if everything's functional, what's actually functional? And within CrossFit, we talk about, hey, there's 6 descriptive characteristics. And I look at it, I think I heard Chuck say this once, like, hey, if I look at a movement, I look through those 6 descriptors, like, does it fit there? And then ultimately there's a defining characteristic, which we'll get to. But let's break down those 6. And I like to hear how you guys, I've seen both of you present this many times, but your favorite things to say about the 6 descriptors. So let's start with the first one, natural.
I mean, I always reference my kids. Like, if you've got kids.
Your kids are anything but natural.
I didn't say they were natural. They're natural. They're not normal. Yeah, there's a difference.
There's a difference. I get
They're
it.
definitely natural.
That's
they're not
good.
normal. Yeah, I'll use the same kind of verbiage that I would use when we're talking about something, a body position being neutral. So natural, neutral, normal is the way I look at it, which is, does that look normal? And it doesn't, in normal, so if you think about neutral cervical spine, right? Well, if you think about how many things you do if you just play sports, where I'm not going to be in a neutral cervical spine, but still looks natural. So like if you're in that kind of universal athletic position, like you're going to be slight extension of cervical spine. But if you were like this, that would not look normal. Just like if you were overextended, this would not look normal. But if you're here, that looks normal. So I look at functional movements very similar, which is like, does that look weird? If it looks weird, it very likely won't fall in the category of functional. Now, that's not an absolute statement, but
And none of these are absolute when we talk about
But it does
this.
simplify it down, which is like, it should look normal. Like you shouldn't look and be like, what the fuck is going on over there? Right?
I like that.
weird.
That's really,
Yeah, you don't
That's
walk down
cool.
the street and see people like
that's the joke I always make, yeah.
people say people do. You always use that in your lectures, and that shows up with regard to kids. That's probably the simplest way to see it is the way that kids work in under the age of 6, the way that they move about their world and navigate their world. Those are natural things that they're going to do. The things that you do in your life, picking up stuff. I think that I like what you said, Fern, about like, what is the natural and neutral positions that are we can identify. Somebody on staff said, Joe DeGain always says, like, we have a really keen eye for looking at human movement. Like, our eye identifies like that. That looks like the way that a human is supposed to move, and that's not.
Right.
And so that fits into that category. I think the other piece that I like to throw into when I discuss natural is a little sciencey stuff in terms of like the biomechanics around how things might work. Right? It is, what is the natural sequencing and action of the legs when you run versus the natural sequencing of the legs that when you are on a machine with your hip fixed in a seat and then you're doing a leg curl. Like, one is natural and what our body is designed to do, and one doesn't fit that description because that's not how we move about the world, right? So, yeah, I think that they both of those are really, really cool. But, yeah.
Let's keep chipping away. Essential. Right? We talk about these are essential to quality of life. And I remember hearing Glassman at my first level 1, like, who visited an assisted living home? Cool, keep your hands up if you want to move into one. It's like, of course not. But most people don't wind up there because they're sick. They wind up there because they can't do these natural, neutral, normal things anymore. How else do you guys describe that?
Yeah, this one hits home for me big time because my grandmother started CrossFit 7 years ago, and she's 83.
83 now?
Mm-hmm, she's 83
She's
now.
well into her 70s, and you got her to start CrossFit.
Yep.
Nice.
She started because of my brother had a son, and she was going to be a part of his caretaking. And she's like, I got to get my life together. I'm like, yeah.
Get up and get down.
Yeah, exactly. And she was relatively fit before that and healthy, but that has changed her life. And she says, like, the more you do, the more you can do. Simple put, like, the more you do, the more you can do. And
Grandma's got some bombs over there,
She's got some bombs,
That's
yeah.
good. I'm gonna write that
She did
down.
her first handstand that she can ever remember, like, last year.
In her 80s?
At 82.
Octogenarian doing handstands
Yeah,
over
she
there?
crushed in it. Yeah. And the process about being essential is like, okay, she started this journey because there was an infant in the family that she was going to start to take care of. Okay, how much does an infant weigh? Like 10 pounds? She's got to be able to carry him around and pick. I know, but like, you know what I mean? Like, not the day that he was born. Yeah. So he's going to progressively grow, right? And so she's like, I got to be able to pick up this dude from growing. I'm like, that means that every time you come into the gym, we need to continue to make sure that you're moving the needle in your deadlifts, in your ability to carry, in your grip strength, and all that stuff, so that she can do what she wants to do that is essential in her life, taking care of her great grandson actually. And then she's also more independent. Like, she can do what she wants to do. She's not going to have to, she's not worried about a nursing home. Like,
well, that's a, I don't say unique, but that one has an additional layer of essential to it. It's not only essential to her life, it's essential to his life.
Mm-hmm.
To
all
that little
parents,
kid.
right? Grandparents.
So conservatively, you have to think, hey, you need to be able to do almost anything with 30 pounds.
Yeah,
or like
totally.
twist, turn, put it up overhead. Like, if you have a toddler, 30 pounds is not like a huge kid, even if you're, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, depending on what you're looking at.
Madison's 3, and since she's not floppy at whatever age that was, I throw her up in the air. Essentially a thruster that I let go.
Right.
And Roz is like...
Those are called wall ball shots.
Yeah, basically a wall ball. It's essentially a wall ball. And she always, like, now that she can count, she wants to do 10. I'm like, geez, this is getting heavy. Like, she's 30 pounds. But I said to Roz the other day, I was like, imagine if I can do this till she's 21. How strong? I mean, that'd be weird at some point, right?
It would be very weird.
But how strong you have to be, and it's the same principle. Like,
Yeah.
I want to keep being able to move this child as long as you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's to kind of bring it back to the first one, which is that natural, normal. It's use or lose, right? If you don't do these things, kind of like going back to what your grandma said, you're not going to be able to do them, right? So you can pair those two together, which is like the more you do, the more you can do. Well, the less you do, the less you can do. Like, it works in both directions.
If you don't use it, you lose it.
You lose it, at which point you run into a whole host of problems, right?
We call it decrepitude,
Correct.
right? The loss of the ability to do these functional movements. And, before we talk about that, I do another shout out to Joe DeGain. We talk about some of these movements like, oh, are they essential? And people bring, what about like this or that, like the ladder, right? You ever do ladder drills, agility drills at the box? And I'm like, I don't know. We can argue whether we need to, but if grandma at 83 can do the ladder or kick up into a handstand.
Well, it's part of that. I mean, it might not be functional by definition potentially, but it is absolutely involving a minimum of 2 of the 10 general physical skills.
For sure, but
like
more
coordination and agility.
More from the perspective, well, if grandma can get into a handstand, I'm not worried that I'm going to get a call like I fell down and I can't get up.
Yeah.
Same with the snatch, same with the ladder. Like, the longer you can do these in life, the more suited you are to stay out of that assisted living home.
I mean, if you think like, how is the agility ladder going to help? And we're not saying that she's going to be doing a speed ladder, but
hey, don't knock this 83-year-old grandma.
But if
She might be going to
even
the
bringing that
combine.
even further down, like just being able to jump rope, being able
Yeah.
to jump onto a box or a plate or whatever that is.
that person is far less likely to have a slip and fall in
That's
the
the point,
bathroom, in
right?
the shower.
And it's stuck there.
And
get
if they
stuck
do,
there.
right, if they fall, they can get back up. We talk about decrepitude and rehabilitative in nature. Have you guys, I know you have, I'm asking, but people that have come in like, I can't do CrossFit, my back hurts. Come on in. 3 months later, they're like, oh yeah, my back doesn't hurt anymore, or my knees. And we talk about these functional movements are not only going to prevent decrepitude, but they are rehabilitative. Do them, like you said, do them to get better at them.
There's like some components of the human body that I think that are analogous to like engines. So if anybody is like a gearhead out there, you know, like a lot of diesel engines, whether it be maritime or regular diesel engines, like they're made to run. I mean, like they run for extended periods of time. And a lot of times you will start to have a lot of problems when, if like in the Navy it's called going cold iron, meaning like you turn it off completely and just leave it off. When you crank that thing back up, you start to have problems for all sorts of reasons, right? Combustion, expansion, you know, like everything involving thermodynamics. But the human body's the same way, right? It's meant to move. And when you don't move it, it's hard to get it moving again. And then it's not shocking that things break. You're like, my back hurts. And you're like, well, why does your back hurt? Well, A, you don't pick things up. So now you're weak. Also, you don't have basic capacity to do something simple like touch your toes. That has a lot to do with why your back hurts. Because that is a basic human function, would be to just hinge at the hip and reach down and touch something on the floor. So I think we're meant to move that way. And the more we move, the better things work.
Yep.
Right? You think about like getting into like high volume training. Like everybody's been to a competition at some point, and you've been your CrossFit.
Third place, battle of the boxes, no big deal. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In the special division. But think about it like this is a microcosm of a larger concept. So if you think about, let's just say you had 3 events in that day. First one, you get really warmed up. Second one, you get warmed up a little bit. Third one, you're like, let's go.
Yeah.
I'm not warming up for the third time.
Yeah.
Like, yes, maybe I should touch that weight, but I'm good. I'm
My
ready.
body has moved
my
today.
body has moved, and I'm ready to attack whatever this is. And but if you think about it on a longer scale, and if I'm moving every single day, it's that funny. It's like, you ever seen a lion stretch, or what is it? It's
Yeah,
a
a
Jaguar.
leopard.
leopard. Yeah.
They do not. They're supple.
Yeah, they just go. So I think it's that, right? I think it's they're meant to move, and when we stop that motion, it creates problems.
It's why for many people, you know, you see the games athletes, like we don't really take rest days. They move on, they have less intense days, less
Way
volume.
less intense days.
But I know for me too, it's like a day off, I still want to walk or hop on the bike and just go like, just
Do
move
something
easy.
Yeah, some zone 2, some
keeping it
rowing or something like that.
Oiled, right? Keeping the machine oiled.
Yeah, I think that another way to look through that we see all over the world is that people that have a lifestyle that requires them to move, farming,
Right.
agriculture stuff, oil and gas, like manual labor type of jobs, whatever that stuff is that's out there that people are doing. And you look at these like farmers that are 80 years old and they're just throwing bales of hay around, and they're like lugging their kids around, and they can squat and deadlift and pick, and you're like, because they never stopped doing anything ever. And so that, to your point, the more that we continue, the body is meant to move in the way that the tissue, the whole way the system supports itself with circulation, with blood flow, with the joint fluidity, all of that stuff like that has to, if it gets stuck, then it's stuck and none of that is moving around, and then it's hard to gain it back.
Yeah.
And it takes more time. What you had asked about like experience with people in your affiliates or people that you've come across that have used rehabilitative stuff. We just saw that in our gym recently. We had a member that joined not long ago, and when he came in, he was both knees were braced up, and he's like, I can't squat. And I'm like, okay. And this has been less than 6 months, and now he's like, he's running and squatting below parallel, and he's like, CrossFit fixed my knees, and I'm like, yeah, That's what your knees are meant to do. They're not meant to be just locked into this limited range of motion without accessing all of the musculature that surrounds them to support them and be able to move that way. Because they were just locked into place. Yeah. They were just stuck there.
And like you said, use it or lose it. At some point, if you're not going to, I had a conversation with my dad who was dealing with back issues. I'm like, Dad, what is your expectation to get this better? You're 70. You're not going to magically wake up one day and be like, oh, everything feels good. You have to be doing these things to get better. Universal motor recruitment pattern. That's not that it's a tough one, but I think all these other words I know natural, I know safe, I get it. How do you guys explain that?
Yeah, but it also is directly connected to core to extremity. So those two things are right next to each other. Yeah. Because it's the universal motor recruitment pattern is the core to extremity pattern that we're looking for. So it is a mouthful, but what we do applies to everything else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's the simplest way to put it.
You're not going to be able to avoid it. It's ubiquitous. It's just I don't care what you're doing as a profession or where you live. You're going to encounter these patterns, these movements, these planes. That's just outside of just being literally locked in a casket. You're not going to
pick things up. You're going to put them overhead. You're going to squat.
Yeah, I don't care what you do. You're going to have to move that way in some way, shape, or form. And the other part of that is let's just say you pick one movement pattern. I'm going to train that movement pattern. It has carryover to the other ones, right? None of them exist in a vacuum, unless I'm training in some of those where I'm going to be seated with my hip trapped and I'm just literally going to isolate the extension of the knee with quite literally nothing else. But where are you going? And not to say that has no value, because it does have value.
Yeah, but where are you going to see that?
Where are you going to see that? You're not going to see that anywhere. At no point are you going to have to do just that to navigate your daily life. You're going to have to do that plus some other things all put together, which gets into the compound yet reducible.
E.C. Sinkowski used to say she struggled with muscle ups, and she started doing a lot of split jerks and push jerks, and all of a sudden her muscle ups got better. And it's universal motor recruitment pattern. These things lend themselves to one another. You improve your deadlift, you're probably better at box jumps. You're probably better at running, because they look alike. They help one another.
Mm-hmm. There's a study that was done years ago. It was one of the strongest correlates to sprinters. There's two. One was their hex bar deadlift, and the other one was their Bulgarian split squat, which neither one of those is running, by the way.
No.
But you can see how they look like running.
In some capacity, they are components of running, and then focusing on that particular movement pattern like that has carryover into sprinting to produce higher power or drive your foot into the ground harder in order to propel yourself forward. Yeah. So weird things like that, you're like, oh, okay, well that checks out if you think about it logically. Those 1 + 1 = 2 here. I can see how we would get there for sure.
Glassman used to say, we talk about essential, now we talk about safe. It'd be silly to stand up here and tell you these movements are essential for quality life, but they're inherently dangerous. They're safe. And that makes total sense. If they're natural, if they're normal, if they're essential to living a fulfilling life, they're probably safe as well.
I always joke.
We should hope so.
Yeah.
I always joke. The easiest way, I think, to explain this, at least to people that are sitting in the level 1 environment, is hey, when you guys started CrossFit, somebody explained to me what kind of mover you were. Just give me an adjective.
Yeah,
and it's just
terrible,
awful, the worst, right? And I'm and how many of you sustained catastrophic injuries when you first started? And they're like, nobody. Now, not to say that you weren't sore and you didn't have some tweaks and pulls and things like that. That should be expected in any training protocol.
And the argument I always it's if you don't do anything, you're going to be in far more pain.
Yeah. But my point is all of us started that way. Remember, the internal rotation was the only way I was capable of overhead squatting, full pterodactyl.
I've seen videos of that.
Right? And it's did I sustain any injuries? No. Am I recommending that you overhead squat that way? Also, no. But the point is, you can train with suboptimal technique for a very long time and not get injured.
I'm still doing it.
Correct.
So, Brentie, take us through the hierarchy. of safety?
So the most, well, I would say that we could even add one more layer, and there's three things.
You're going to add to Glassman's lecture. Is that
No,
what's
no,
happening
no,
right
no.
now?
I'm not the one that did this. This actually came from Todd Widman. This is the way that he describes this. Is the most risky thing that you could do ever, period, for your health and well-being and longevity is to not move at all, period. So like the more sedentary somebody is, the more at risk we can become.
100%.
Within the hierarchy of safety that from the level 1, the most risky thing that we would do next after that is to not train functional movement.
So you're saying we do nothing.
Do nothing.
But then above that is like, hey, you could go to the gym, you could do the leg extensions, leg curls.
You could take a walk every day.
But we're not doing enough functional movements in there. Gotcha.
And if you're moving, that's better than not moving. Next phase is if we are doing not training functional movements at all, right? So that's the most risky thing, is to not train them because of what we said before. If they're essential and they're everywhere, then if we don't use it, we lose it. If you don't ever practice squatting or picking up stuff off the ground or putting things over your head and moving that way, the way that functional movements are designed to move your body in the way that what life demands, then you won't ever have the ability to do that. And you're more at risk for decrepitude and hurting yourself when life demands that stuff. Yeah. Right? So like you don't ever know how to pick up stuff off the ground. You don't ever practice that. And then all of a sudden you have a 40-pound kid that's on the ground and you got to pick him up. And what do?
Blow out your back.
You blow something out, like you get hurt because you haven't been training that way. So that's risky. So next hierarchy is the like less risk, not optimal, is to train functional movements without optimal technique.
Like
what you were just saying, you do. Right?
Every day.
That's
how I do it.
So less than optimal technique, we're still training functional movements. So we're doing these big things that are essential and life demands, but there's no coach, or we don't know if it's optimal technique, or we're not focusing on that.
And it's really, you started a little bit later than we did, but like that's how most CrossFitters of our generation started. It's like, hey, there's CrossFit.com. There's the workout. I've never done 3 of these movements. I just watched Greg Amundsen do it.
Give it a go.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah. But I mean,
turns out not a lot, actually. The worst that could happen is you would probably just get fit.
Yeah.
We all did it.
Yeah.
And like Brentie is saying, is it optimal? No. Does it still work? 100%.
Yeah. And then the last thing, which is the most safe, is that we train functional movements with optimal technique. Like that's the gold standard.
And they're also safe relative to non-functional counterparts.
Yeah.
Right? So the example I always use is, and I'm sure you do as well, you load up that deadlift, 10 pounds too heavy, what happens? Maybe it budges, maybe it doesn't, you put it back down on the ground. If I was like, hey, Fern, you want to do chest day? Let's go 1 rep max that, fly. We're going to tear
100-pound dumbbells.
I would go 120, but if you want to go light, that's fine.
My torso,
rip your arms off.
It's like, the SNL skit where the arms just fly off people. But they're safe relative to non-functional movements. I mean, Fern regularly at the Naval Academy got drunk and tried to deadlift cars.
How did you know that?
And that's at post 1 rep max loads. That's the other part of the safety.
No, some cars weren't. Some cars he was able to, right?
Back then, I was a little bit stronger.
Yeah, but why are they safe at post 1 rep max loads?
Because you're in optimal positions that your body is meant to be in.
Yeah, and so you distribute forces across the joints and all major muscles, and if it's beyond your capacity, then it's just not going to do it. It won't move. The weight won't move. You won't be able to pick it up.
Compound yet irreducible. Talk to me.
Multi-joint.
Big moves.
Big moves, multi-joint, anything. Go out into the world and do something. Hell, I don't know, almost anything that's not compound. Meaning that's not going to involve 2 joints for you to do
outside of the gym.
That's what I mean.
Right? Like the only place we do these things, we could talk about that going back to natural to all these other things, is oftentimes the only place you see these movements is inside a standard gym. On machines.
And for clarity, we're not poo-pooing people that are doing rehab things post-injury where that's required.
Or even going to the gym and doing these things. Like Brentie said, it's better to do that than nothing.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's more optimal to do compound movements because, like you're saying, in the real... Look, we all love CrossFit for the leaderboard because we want to look sexy, all those cool things. But the sexiest part of it is I can live my life better.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's, and listen...
Did you just agree with me? That was so awkward. It was so awkward.
Isometric holds, things of that nature have a place.
L-sits for sure.
L-sits, isolation movements, curls, tricep extensions.
Look at that.
All
Look
of
at
them.
that.
Yeah, look at that. I don't know what that is, but look at it. They all have a place. Our contention is like they're not bad. Like they're not the devil. We're just saying that they shouldn't comprise the bulk or the meat of your training protocol.
Well,
they should be the vegetables. They're the add-ons to get a little bit extra out of what it is that you're doing.
Right.
You
And
know?
you can't, the irreducible, right, is that you cannot train all of those isolation movements and then expect to have optimal functional capacity.
You've seen someone with a great leg day routine and their squat looks like absolute garbage.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys have done this, but like you go to a hotel gym and you're like, let's see if I can max out this machine or that machine because we've been doing these functional movements and we can. And I do think maybe, at least for me, and I would guess for you too as well, like you can get very dogmatic in the beginning of your CrossFit journey. And it's like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we can
I
all...
think that's the natural life cycle.
Yeah, and now I think... Are you in your 40s?
I am. I just turned 40.
Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Not today.
No, it's today. It's today. We're
in
celebrating.
December. It's been a
But, I
minute.
mean, we're all in our 40s now. We've
Yeah.
all been doing CrossFit over 10 years. And I think we've come to appreciate the fact that there's other methodologies. There's other things out there. We believe this is the best methodology for fitness, which we'll talk about in the future episode. But it's okay to do these other things.
I think we collectively as a community have probably done a poor job over the last 10 years, if I was to be critical of us as a whole, of taking some of these other training modalities or ideas or principles and then bringing them in to help supplement the core component that is CrossFit.
What's
you guys
something-
remember what was the guy's name? It was like functional patterns guy.
Functional movement pattern. A lot of...
No, he was a guy. He was just always in like either on Instagram or in forums, just arguing about how like training in transverse plane was the thing,
yeah.
right? And I'm like, listen, nobody's debating that like
That's valuable.
that's valuable. We're just saying that like if that's all you ever do, you're missing out on many things, right? So it's like again, I think everybody. It's kind of like the nutrition argument. It's like I think we all agree on like 99.9% of this, but it's like that 0.01% where everybody's like ready to go to war over it. And it's like, nope, it's only rotation. If you don't do anything, like nothing in the frontal plane, I'm like, okay. I mean, if that's the sword you want to die on, but it sounds silly when you say it. So.
Quarter extremity. We kind of alluded to it earlier. Universal motor recruitment pattern are typically quarter extremity movements. But Brentie, explain that to someone listening.
Just that all functional movements are going to start from the center, right? The big muscles are that surround your pelvis and your core, the abs, the back, the hip muscles, all of that musculature is the strongest, most powerful muscle groups in our body. And all functional movements are going to originate there in the center. Whether we talk about at the level 1, like everything starts with a brace of the core.
Even the air squat.
Even the air squat. We brace at the core, tighten the belly, and then we do the rest of the movement. If you're throwing a ball, if you're jumping, if you are swimming, there's a brace and an engagement, right? Whatever that word actually means. But tight, like that, in the musculature gets involved first here, and then it radiates outward from there. And that's what that is the universal pattern that we see across is that pattern. It is the core to extremity pattern where we move from the center out.
Even shooting a basketball.
Yeah, it's like I always like to think of it like this. No matter what you were doing, that principle of core to extremity would naturally exert itself in the event the goal was optimal output. Doesn't even matter what it was.
Yep.
Right? If you're like, hey, I was trying to get the most out of doing this thing, eventually you would naturally fall into that pattern if nobody told you anything about what you were doing. Like if you just went through this weird human trial of trial and error.
Like I'm going to try to snatch the most weight by bending my arms early.
Correct. Or you just be like, hey, I want you to take that from there and move it to there, right?
Yep.
Whatever it is, in whatever capacity, whatever the object is, there would be a natural sloughing off of all of the bad techniques, and eventually you would be found with like, this is the best one because that was the one that led me to the desired outcome.
Whether it was lift the most weight, move the fastest.
Doesn't even matter what it was.
Shoot a basketball, hit a volleyball, swim. It doesn't matter at all.
You would all end up doing the same thing because you're like, this is the one that works.
Brentie and I both do jiu-jitsu, and it's always fun because shrimping in jiu-jitsu. What is it? It's
This.
quarter extremity, right? Shooting a double leg.
Right.
It's quarter. Like if you look at almost any sport, you can overlay it on top of CrossFit movements and be like, oh, those are the exact same movement patterns.
Yeah.
And if I want to be good at them, it starts by bracing the midline and, working out to the shoulders, the legs, the extremities. So these are the descriptive characteristics. And now if you've paid attention, you can, like you said, look at anything. And I love that natural, neutral, normal. Let me throw a couple movements at you and tell me like where they fit. Because we can argue like the snatch. But we would say, hey, there's quarter extremity, right? People will say, well, is that a functional movement? Am I ever going to find myself snatching outdoors?
No.
And we joke, like, you get on an airplane, you're going to snatch your luggage overhead.
No.
But you can say, well, it's quarter extremity. And if you dig into the fitness lecture, the 10 general skills, balance, accuracy, agility, coordination. What about double unders?
No.
No what?
It's not something I'm going to find myself doing.
So
outside.
where does that play into, the CrossFit methodology?
It has components of functional movements. Not it does. What we're saying when you have functional movements is not that like that movement in its unique, independent vacuum is by definition a functional movement, but it contains all of the other functions of them.
Right.
Meaning, like it's not double unders. It's jumping.
It's jumping.
I
Right.
like that.
It's not snatching. It's squatting.
And it's also
or
jumping
deadlifting,
again, right?
deadlifting,
Jumping and squatting.
Jumping
Yeah.
and squatting and deadlifting and jumping and squatting. And then you put them together because somebody was just like, this seems kind of cool. Let's do that, right? So it's not that it's functional in that nature. If we go back to or move forward, if we're thinking about order or lecture order, if you go into the what is fitness lecture, it contains all of those components of the 10 general physical skills.
For sure. And then you do 30 of them for time.
Right.
And all of a sudden we have cardiorespiratory endurance.
Yep.
All right, so we talk about descriptors. Let's talk about the defining characteristic of the ability to move large loads, long distances, quickly.
I was going to say natural.
It's always funny.
And also like that, but to speak back on the snatch that you just mentioned, the snatch moves large loads, long distances.
Right,
quickly.
it's the world's fastest lift.
It
You can
checks the
argue,
boxes.
It checks
right?
the
I mean,
boxes.
large loads, relatively speaking. Let's be like my 95-pound PR. You might argue, and you also might say, for me, it's not that long of a distance.
Maybe,
But right, it's from the ground to overhead. I mean, for anyone's body, that's as far as something can move.
Yep.
So let's dig into this concept because ultimately it will lead to intensity. But this idea of large loads, long distances, and quickly.
Well, I think at least I would like to think that the objective there was that there has to be some delineation, like quantifiable delineation between functional and non-functional. Just like, okay, when we say, because like the descriptors, those are like qualitative,
Yeah.
right? And then we're like, well, what's the quant here? The quant is just like, what's the math?
Yep.
This one does more or has more output than that one. Okay. Well, if we pull out 1,000 movements, and we just start throwing them in there, boom. They would naturally fall into one of those two buckets. Like this one has better output, better output, better output. This one has subpar output, subpar. And then they would naturally fall into those categories. And that's what I think is the big takeaway there. It's just like they have significantly higher output or better outcomes, if you will, when you're talking about move large loads, long distances quickly.
Yeah, and that output is correlated, and you can feel it. Greg used to talk about that. Like, what do those movements do? What is a high power, the large load, long distance movement? What does that feel like? It messes you up.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Mess you up. Remember that?
Yeah.
It messes you up.
It messes you up.
It messes you up, and you're not going to get messed up by doing bicep curls. That doesn't mean that they're wrong, but that doesn't mess you up.
It doesn't mean you couldn't get injured doing bicep curls.
Right.
It doesn't mean.
But it's
Yeah.
not going to leave you on your back gasping for air.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's like a weird interpretation of mess you up. When you think about the result of doing some of those workouts, like what is when we say what does mess you up mean? I think it means, or if we were to try to describe it in some sort of weird nerd fashion, it's just like CNS and physiological overload,
Yeah,
where like the body was just like, holy shit, what just
It's
happened?
WOD drunk.
Yeah.
And it's that systemic response of like high heart rate, sweaty, respiratory rate, fatigue, Like what that
ATP expenditure,
everything,
like
all of the things combined together that we talk about that makes it like, what does it mean to have what are the physiological responses of a high power thing that you do in anything? It doesn't matter if it's jujitsu, it doesn't matter if it's doing Fran. It is this thing that happens that you're like, oh man, I can't describe that. It just messes me up.
You know, we've all been there.
It's like combustion, right? Like really what it is. It's like, oh, what happens inside of that piston, there's basically an explosion that's housed inside of this engine, right? And you just do that over and over and over. But like, that's what it feels like. It feels like your body exploded from an energy standpoint.
Did you guys ever have mono?
No.
You never had mono?
Do you want me to get it?
I'll kiss you right now. But, you know, I always explain it where like you do a heavy day and you like wake up the next, I'm not sore, but like, I think I might have mono. Like, who did I kiss yesterday? And it's just like your body's exhausted. Like we've all been there. That's kind of like that
CNS.
Yeah, that's that CNS response. So large loads, long distances quickly. We talk about force times distance divided by time, right? Large loads, force. Long distances, distance. Quickly. How long
what did you move?
do it?
How far did you move it? How long did it take?
So we have that equation, force times distance, which is also work. But then when you add time as the denominator, we can generate power. And we talk about you are as powerful as you are intense as you are powerful. So not only are these movements creating a tremendous amount of power, all of a sudden we have, again, going back to definitions, measurable, observable, and repeatable data, which is unique. I don't know about you guys, but for me, it was like, oh, am I moving the pin down every time? Or maybe is my, run time a little bit faster? That'd be the most measuring I did. But now you can really dig in
I
and get
benched
geeky.
250 and then I benched 255 and you're like, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that was it. So now we can look at any workout across the board and have metrics.
Yeah.
And again, we don't think you need to do that. You don't need to have a whiteboard and do.
Well, the practical application of that
calculus.
principle of the quantification of that is your logbook, right?
Correct.
So we're not saying you should go in there and be like, well, how far did my center of mass move, and then what was the load?
Did your time go down? Did your weight go up?
Yeah, and that's what it is. Be like, did those metrics move in the right direction? That's really all I'm asking, and that's. I think people get a little, and I think there's value in nerding out in there. I also think there is a point of diminishing return on nerding out on there, and then I think there's a lot of value in the black box, which is like, are we going in the right direction? Yeah. Don't worry about it then.
Don't worry about why.
Don't worry about it.
I love that. That black box concept is not something that gets really brought up anymore. And Glassman used to say, like, hey, we have an input and we have an output. What happens inside that box?
I don't care.
Really doesn't matter.
I don't care.
Are we getting better?
Yeah.
And if you talk to some real heavy brain folks in the exercise phys world, I think the objective ones are the ones who are the most honest, many of which would say, we kind of think what we know is we know what's going on in there, but the reality is there's so much that we still don't know. And to make the assumption that we know that this is exactly how this works and that we could predict all of these other things, it's just not real. Like, we know within reason, but there's a lot we're just like, we don't really have an explanation for that. Like, because we can continually find things or scenarios that violate what we thought.
Well,
like,
this is going back to what you said. Like, we sprinkle in, like, hey, now we're twisting. Hey, now we're doing some yoga over. Like, inside that black box, what's happening? Oh, we're getting more mobile, or we're able to lift more, so it's working. Now, that shouldn't be all that we do, but when we sprinkle it in, like you said, a couple vegetables here and there.
I was listening to, I think it was Peter Attia talk about something the other day, and it was him. It might have been him and Chris Williamson, but people like to think about, hey, these are the health metrics that are going to get you to live the longest amount of time. It's like, it's one of many metrics that will probably predict your lifespan. So if you think like, hey, muscle mass is one. Okay, cool. The other one would be VO2 max. Like there's some data that would suggest like, hey, good VO2 max is a good predictor of longevity. But then you get into like things that have nothing to do with fitness, which are relationships. Right? The number of relationships that you have like throughout the years of your life is a very strong correlate to longevity. What is your, you have like a sense of like, I have to do something today. Purpose, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at purpose. So like, it's not just to be like, hey, what's your VO2 max? You're going to live forever. And I'm like, you can have great VO2 max, but if you don't have any of those other components, like we can make some assumptions about your mental health, your longevity. So it's like, put all those things together and be like, why does it work? Who cares? Who cares why it all works? Like
It
try
just
to
does.
try to improve all
just
of them. Try to have better relationships. Try to have good VO2 max. Try to have good muscle mass. Try to have something that you need to do every day when you get up, and you'll probably live a long, happy life.
And not to get completely derailed, but it's like the type of people that have strong, healthy, and good relationships are probably the type of people that are doing a lot of other things. You know, I got a red light recently, and is that funny that I got a red light?
It's not shocking. I don't know if it's funny.
You know, but my buddy from
You're just doing all the hacks.
I'm
Just
trying.
get it all done.
But are you pointing it at your butt? That's what I really think.
It goes in, actually.
It's a taint red light.
No, but my buddy was like, is it working?
God.
Is it working? I was like, is it working? I don't know. Is it the fact that I'm sitting in front of a red light, or is it the fact that I'm decompressing for 10 minutes a day, or I tend to stretch during that time? Like, it's like, who knows what's working, but it is. And it's the same thing.
Who cares?
Yeah, so let's go back to intensity. You kind of alluded to it earlier, like there's max intensity, but there's actually high, medium, and low intensity. And the reason we love intensity, Brentie,
because it gives us the results.
but
that
give us
we're
the
seeking.
long one, just so you appear like really intelligent.
Because it's the independent variable most commonly associated with maximizing the rate of return on favorable adaptations.
Can I tell you guys a quick tangent? I'm at my second level 1. Like, I took my level 1 in October 2007, and I was dating this girl, and she wanted to take it in like February of 2008. So I go back, and by the way, taking it the second time was like, now I'm really learning this. So Todd Whitman's giving the CrossFit lecture, and we're at that Maine. It's like a police base in Maine.
Okay.
Vallisboro, I think it was called. And he's like, who knows what intensity is? And I rattle that off. And he like turned his head over at me. He was like, what the, like, how did, you know, but it was like at that time, not many people were taking it for the second time, but it was like,
Humble brag.
yeah, humble brag.
And then I got on, and then they asked me to get on some other stuff.
And now I'm a red shirt.
But it, you know, it's that's what it is. And then, like you said, the street slang of that, it's how we get these results.
Yeah, and I think that what I like to bring out when I say that thing, that definition or that goal, is that what are the things I try to pull out. What are the things that you're looking for? It goes back to what are people signing up for? Like, what are you here for? What do you want to do? And everybody's like, be more fit. And I go, okay, no, but be specific.
Lose
about
weight,
that.
look better naked.
Yeah, what are the things I want to lose? I want to get off my meds. I want to lose some body fat. I want to gain some muscles. I want to be stronger. I want to get pull-ups.
Pick up my grandkid.
Pick up my grandkid. These are the things. Okay, all of those things that you want. There's not. What's cool is that we're not talking about a specialized program for each of those things. Intensity is it's not the only variable, but it is the independent variable that maximizes the rate of return to get to those things, right?
It's the one thing, if applied, will get you there.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say this to give Brentie a shout out, by the way. And we also didn't introduce Brentie, but owner here at CrossFit Mafia, level 4, as you can see by her mug. But we were like, hey, we're going to talk about CrossFit. And we didn't give her any additional information other than that.
We didn't have to.
Exactly my point. And people are, we spoke about it on a recent podcast. It's like when you live this stuff. I wasn't like, hey, Brentie, just so you know, I'm going to ask you what intensity
Make
is.
sure you brush up on the CrossFit theory.
And now you know, is it, that's why she's on staff? Is it, you know, but it's like when you live this stuff, and going back to how we kicked off this podcast, I will be better suited to get anybody into my box, to get anyone started with CrossFit by having a strong education and foundation of what it is.
Yeah, again, it just allows you to have a better conversation. It's no different than training an athlete out on the floor, right? Meaning, if I watch somebody that's a dumpster fire of a mover, right? Let's just, I don't know, pick a movement. What are they doing?
They're back squatting.
Okay, they're back squatting. And I see a whole host of things that are going wrong.
Knees go in, they're on their toes.
Yeah, their head position's in the wrong spot. They're anterior tilting their pelvis when they move. I could give them all that. Or I could just be like, hey, wind up your stance just a little bit for me. I'm like, okay. They're like, that felt better. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Do that again the next time, right? It's to be able to take all of that information and deduce it down to what's the one thing that this person needs right now in this very moment that would get them to improve just a little bit. And if you take that outside of I'm training somebody to I'm having a conversation with somebody who might be considering starting, it's like, what would be the one thing that I would be able to give them that would, you know, coerce them into considering that they should start. Be like, well, it would be knowing all these things and then asking them some questions. Be like, well, I really just want to do this, and I definitely don't want to get bulky. And I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. That's not going to happen. But like, you'll for sure get stronger. I'm like, okay, I'm in. I didn't talk about constantly, I didn't talk about variance. I didn't talk about intensity. I didn't draw an equation on the board or anything like that. I'm like, yeah, we can help you with that.
If you have somebody interested in CrossFit and you find yourself drawing equations on the board,
You fucked up.
Something's going,
Well, maybe. There might be people that are into stuff like that. There's always an exception to the rule.
for sure. But our mutual friend Mark England likes to say, questions pull, answers push.
Yeah.
And that's how we get into this. So bringing it back to intensity, we can talk about, it's the independent variable, but it's also the scariest part of CrossFit.
Yeah, it's the nervous P.
It's the nervous P. It's why people think they can't do it. Like, they walk in and we're doing pull-ups. It's like, well, I can't do pull-ups, so I'm out of here. Well, the way we get everyone to have intensity is through the art of scaling. But we also talk about the fact that intensity is relative.
Yeah, it's relative to the body and the mind.
Physical and psychological tolerances.
Yeah, which your body can tolerate and what your mind can tolerate, in most instances, don't match.
So let's talk about Grandma.
Yep.
Right now, she's 83.
Yep.
She comes in. Her Fran might look very different than Hobart's Fran,
Yeah.
who works out here.
I don't know. He's been slacking.
He
a
has
little
been
bit,
slacking.
so.
They might be doing the same weight, for the record, James. But
He's still going to try to beat her. It doesn't matter what he's doing.
and that's the
true.
coolest
He might
part.
trip her, yeah.
To be clear.
That is the coolest part. Like, because of scaling, I can compete with Grandma. Like, because she's working out to her intensity level, and I'm working out to mine. The needs of Olympic athletes and our grandparents differ by intensity, not kind.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the psychological and physiological stuff is cool to kind of see how that shows up in the world in your affiliate and when you coach people, because somebody like I like to use the example of like an ex Division I wrestler.
I thought you were going to say basketball player, because we got one
Or
right
a basketball player, but I think wrestlers are even more crazy.
here. They're crazier and also better than basketball players.
But we're talking about
They're just
somebody.
less athletic.
That might be
You
true.
you guys agree with me that like that person that has like the Joe DeGane of the world, he has a crazy button that can be pushed on.
Oh yeah.
Have I?
A full send crazy
pain to
button.
gain.
No,
Let me tell you of another funny story. So I'm at my level 1, 2007, October, Toronto. Back then we did Fran. So I'm like, look, I remember saying to Sherwood, like, this is gonna be like 8 minutes, dude. You're gonna want to see this. Like, are your cameras on me or what? And because at the time you're working out by yourself. I didn't know what was good. So 3, 2, 1, go. I'm going, and I'm like, I'm winning, crushing this, and this dude way up front stopped. No, he's done. And I'm like, that dude quit. Like, you can stop, like, you can quit. So we wrap up. I'm like, I think it was like an 8:30 Fran. I'm impressed with myself. No one else was impressed. And then it turns out that dude was done. Finished Fran in like 3 minutes. No idea who it was. Years, like a decade later, turns out it was Joe
it was
DeGane.
Joe
I believe
Savage.
that.
Because I saw the picture. I was like, because he had short hair. Now he's got short hair again, but for a long time in between, he had long hair. And I was like, oh, that was Joe DeGane.
He went full psycho mode.
And I was like so impressed, but at the time you think he's quits, but I was like, that's what this can be. I had no idea because I was the only one doing it in Albany, New York at the time.
So back to like what that means with psychological tolerance is that person has a crazy button that you could push on, and they can go full psycho, blackout, go red, seeing red, like they're in it.
Do you have that button?
Not so much anymore.
Did you back when he beat Ben Smith at the
I
regionals?
learned it. I did not beat Ben Smith in the region.
No, you beat him at
I
the
beat him one workout.
Yeah.
I learned it from Sherwood.
You learned so that wasn't innate in you?
I saw and experienced it for the first time when I started training with him, because he for sure has it. And he would just do stuff, and I'd be like, 2009 regionals.
The one you beat, is that the one you beat Ben Smith at a workout?
No, that was 2012. This 2009 was when that was his coming out party, when he qualified for the games that year. So we were doing, it was an every second counts format. It's the final workout. I'm in second place.
At the regional? You were in
At
second
regionals.
place?
They're taking top 6. So it's
you
me.
bump from second to
Just wait. So the lineup here looks like this. So Jeff Tinchern was running the event.
Mackey's-
So
yeah. He's running
the
it.
lineup looks like this. I believe it's Blair Morrison.
I remember, yeah.
It's me. Sherwood is in that heat. Ben Smith is in that heat. Chad Wilkinson is in that heat.
This is the overhead squat. Was it going to be a workout?
It was a 95-pound snatch and chest to bar pull up 21:15.9.
Okay.
And it's every second counts.
I want to
right?
hear how you implode on this.
Oh yeah, and I'm like, all right, here we go, right? So Blair starts, I start, boom, and I get out over my skis on the workout.
How fast were you out over?
Pretty fast,
Like rep
Yeah,
7.
Yeah,
You're like,
it was quick, and just start falling apart. Right, boom, the event's over. Ben screams from the back of the pack all the way to the front, wins, and then I look over at Sherwood, and he has essentially no hands left. He is just
tore 'em up.
Just tore
that's
the
potentially
palms.
the worst workout for hands ever.
He tore the palms off of his hands, and I look at him, and I was just like, "Yep, I definitely wasn't willing to do that."
You didn't go far enough.
You deserve that spot to
Yeah.
go. You deserve that, and I was just like, "Oh," and I already knew Pat at that point. I was working at his gym, but that's an example of like, "Oh, you were willing to go there, and I clearly was not."
Well,
So-
it's not even like willing to. Like, I don't have that button. It's like,
Well, I think that's
It
will.
can be developed
yeah.
a little bit.
You can train it, right? So then over time but this is the point, right? That psychological piece and then marrying that with the physiological response of the combustion that we were talking about earlier, that there's an adaptation had there where it feels less extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about most people can remember, they don't remember maybe what the workout was, but they remember the feeling they had for the first time when they did a CrossFit workout. I was like full
Fran
panic
for a lot of
mode.
people,
You're
right?
like, oh my God, what's happening? Why can't I breathe? Why is my heart rate so high? Like, why can't I just do
My
basic
forearms
functions?
yeah.
You're like, holy shit, right? And then fast forward another year, and I'm like, you still get nervous. Like, you still have a nervous pee, but you don't have that anymore, right? Like, that's the psychological tolerance, the adaptation that's happening, which is like, listen, the output's probably more than that first time that you did it. But the response is different because we've moved the needle a little bit, right? And that you don't have to go, 10 years into your CrossFit, career.
It might be workout 2.
Yeah, it could just be like, oh, okay, like this is now no longer new to me. Like I can kind of deal with this and figure out what I should maybe adjust here. But like that's like everybody has had that. Like remember your first day and they're like, yeah, I basically imploded.
I remember the games workout. It was similar to the open where it was like 10 thrusters, 35 double unders or something. But at the games, they did it a little heavier. I think men did like 135. I was judging Panchik. And he comes out. He's like, just tell me when to go. And I was like, all right, like 10, go. But the dude, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you ever look in someone's eyes and be like, oh, he's not there anymore.
Oh, you checked out.
Yeah, like, he would have just kept doing as many thrusters until I said, go. Right, to the next movement. And I was like, that is something I've never seen before.
That's crazy.
But you are right. Like, I think wrestling versus basketball, like you need, like basketball, you're probably more like at a constant pace.
Definitely
like,
very different.
yeah,
Like those sports are not even
wrestling
remotely
7
close to
minutes,
being
6
the same.
minutes, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
And like if I need that takedown, like you're going into a different mode. And DeGane was a Michigan, Division I wrestler.
And so what I would like to, maybe you can help, because you've done this a lot of times. So take that person that they have the button, the crazy button, but they've been out of the game for a long time. And this is where I think, some of the art of coaching starts to show up, and then we meet matching psychological tolerance and physiological tolerance become really separate because you
they're
played,
way off. Yeah. Here, you're good.
Here you're good,
Yeah.
and you have a crazy button, but you have been out of the game in all capacities of fitness and sport for like 15, 20 years. And then what happens when that person comes to the gym?
Rhabdo.
It gets wild.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that is the case where there was a wrestler who
Yeah.
got rhabdo
Yeah.
from like a kid's workout.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think it's like just knowing that, and then I think your job as a coach there is to immediately put some roadblocks or some governors in place there so that they don't do that.
What would, like, let's say we're doing Fran. What would be some of the things you put out there?
Well, you go back to what we were talking about yesterday. Like, hey, what would I do that would make this not go well?
Right. I would be like, hey, try to win.
Right.
Like,
Win
let's go
round
95 no matter what.
Yeah, no matter
Right.
what, I need you to win round one.
Yeah.
Like that would definitely set me up for failure. So I think because we know when the workout kind of sets in any given workout. I'd be like, right about here is when they're like,
when you
you're
pick
like,
up that
oh
bar for
shit,
15,
like it's happening, right? So if I can pump the brakes on them until that point, because it's going to happen anyway, I'm probably good.
Yeah.
But if they go before that, like if the ignition goes off before we get to that point in the workout where the natural pace of the workout sets in and you just couldn't go any faster if you wanted to, then we have problems. So you just try to keep them off of that red line until they get there. And I'm like, now the workout will solve all of this for them. I don't need to worry about it anymore. Early on is when all the problems happen because they're fresh. They can go at that speed. And I'm like, I don't want you to go at that speed. I'm like, here's kind of how fast I want you to move. I'm like, break that into 5 and 5. Here's what I want you to do. Go over there. And I usually just tell them, I'm like, trust me. You're not going to cheat yourself out of any fitness in this endeavor. And I promise you at the end of this, you will be right where you're supposed to be. And they're like, okay. You know, I always like to give like a little, I'm like, like a little, it's a weird question. I'm like, do you trust me? And they're like, yeah, I think so. And I'm like, here's what I want you to do. And they're like, okay. And I'm like, because I don't want you to do that to yourself. And I've read this book.
Yeah,
I know what happens. I've seen this movie. I know what happens at the end if we veer off, right? Do not go the choose your own adventure route, right? Because it's not going to end well. We're going to have to circle back to chapter 1 again. So just like
live to see another day.
Yeah,
like,
and it's just like
This is day 1, dude.
yeah. So it's just getting them to kind of like slow down and just like pay attention to themselves rather than everything that's happening in their like immediate orbit, which is like a lot of stuff. And it's sensory overload. So they start paying attention to everything else. They're like, oh shit, I got to go faster. And it's just like, no. Forget all of that other stuff. Just do what I tell you to do and you'll be directly over the target, which is where you should be.
And we see this every weekend out to level 1.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is where it's actually implemented on the floor. So we talk about thus far, functional movements, high intensity. One last piece to address here is constantly varied. Right? And constantly varied often gets butchered. Like, you guys don't really get good at anything because you're always doing something different.
I don't know if that's a thing anymore because, I mean, CrossFitters have disproven that time and time again. I mean, you're training for Leadville. Rich just did it last year.
Rich did a level 1. Yeah,
People have
level
made the
100.
Olympics at weightlifting, right?
Right, but I mean, he had at least to my understanding, he had a great time.
Yeah, he did Leadville in like 8 hours and 30
which apparently
minutes,
is
which
phenomenal. I have no
It's really
concept
fast.
for what that looks like.
What's your goal?
To finish.
Yeah, completion.
I don't but that's a whole nother conversation within itself. But it actually fits right here where what we're talking about is like the Leadville 100 mountain bike race is for an elite racer is really fast. We're talking about like 6 hours. Most regular humans are trying to get it done in under 12, and somebody like Rich excelled at that because he has spent how many years has Rich been in CrossFit?
Probably close to hours, like 15.
Yeah,
in the
maybe
15
a
to
little,
20
probably
range.
at least 12. You know.
Okay, so he's been doing this, and what is the games? The games is an 8 to 12 hours per day.
Yeah.
High intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low. That's exactly what the Leadville race is. Climb, go down, climb, go down.
It's been
climb,
like
go down.
accidentally training for the Leadville.
Yeah, because of just the nature of what's the metabolic and energy requirement to do that is he's done that. The games is an endurance event.
Yeah.
With a bunch of little. It doesn't look like
Sprints
that.
inside
But
of
sprints
it, yeah.
inside of a big endurance event, and so
that's a valid
that's why
point.
he's so it makes when people are like, I can't believe. No, it makes perfect sense that he was successful in that because of
If
what
you
he's
understand
done.
all of this and you know what you're looking at.
Right, exactly.
Going back to this is why knowing these things are super valuable.
Well, and we talk about constantly varied. It's broad, general, and inclusive, right? The old expression of it prepares you for the unknown and unknowable. Whatever life throws at you, Leadville, right? Taking care of your kids. The more we vary inside the gym, the better prepared we are.
Well, you joke with me
outside
all
the
the time
gym.
about like every year I do something.
You do something dumb and you don't prepare
It's
for
not
it.
something dumb, but I do something that has a high likelihood.
You do dumb things.
At least true. I try to do something every year that has at least
challenges
some likelihood of failure.
You did Frogman. You did like the extended Diesel Day.
I did the Big Fish fundraiser, which is 30 hours.
I'm doing Diesel Day maybe
Next
by the
month,
time
right?
this comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and people are like, "You're going to train for that?" And I'm like, "Not really."
Yeah, I have been for the last 45 years.
Now, would I do better to like bias my training towards that? For sure. But for me personally, that's not the point. I want to go in there and have to deal with the mental side of that, which is like, oh shit, like is not going well. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
You know, like the first time I did the frogman, like 10 minutes into the swim, I was like, oh, fuck.
I should have prepared.
I was like,
Should've swam
maybe I should
more.
have got in the pool at least once before I did that. You know, but then Cody he's like, are you going to get in the water at all? And I'm like, no. He's like, why? And I'm like, well, because I spent years and years and years doing survival training in the water. I was a rescue swimmer in the Navy. Like, it gets to a point where like,
You're comfortable.
not necessarily comfortable, but like the side stroke, if you know how to do that and you're proficient with it, it is a survival stroke on purpose. You can do it for extended periods of time. So yes, it's going to be cold, but really what I'm doing is I'm getting in there and that's like a zone 2 workout for 90 minutes. Like it's not really anything that's going to be that big of a problem. It's more mental than anything. And I'm like, I get out and I start swimming and I'm like, it's fucking cold out here. And I'm like, I have 90 more minutes of this. Like, all right, here we go. Like, you know, sky, water, sky, water for 90 minutes. You're like, the mental side of that is what becomes the challenge, not so much the physical side of it.
This is exactly why I don't prepare for anything in work. I like the challenge of it.
Expanding the margins of your experience.
Yeah,
I like it. It's good. Yeah.
But
I think that you said earlier that you thought that intensity is the scariest part of this whole thing. I disagree a little bit because I think that most people don't know what intensity is and how to go down that road.
Or might not even be capable.
And might not even be capable. So they just, intensity is kind of like this like, what is that thing? They don't really have, but what is kind of scary and intimidating is, you want me to do what? We're going to sling barbells around, hang from rings, run far, get on bikes, pick up what's a kettlebell? Like the variance picture in the CrossFit space, I think it becomes really overwhelming because then as somebody that's new is like, I can't do I've never done any of that.
Yeah.
well, and that I can appreciate that. And that's where we have the expression we fail at the margins of our experiences. And each one of us and everybody watching started CrossFit with a bubble around them. Some, it's interesting because some people, CrossFit is their first experience in fitness. Like we all had backgrounds, but I'm anxious to hear if you had to kind of elevator pitch what your training was pre-CrossFit, what would it be?
So I, through high school and in college, I was a volleyball athlete in high school, and then like early into college I was still doing that, but then right away in college I started in the long slow distance, the LSD stuff. So I was doing the triathlon, the running, the biking, and then I got into century, like long, really far, and ultra stuff. So I was doing 100 miles on my bike, 50 miles of running, hours and hours and hours of hiking, and I really love it. Like
for minimal weight training.
I didn't lift weights. I actually didn't like it at all, even though I was a personal trainer, and I've been a personal trainer and in the fitness industry for 22 years now, and I taught people how to do it all the time. I didn't enjoy doing that, so I really didn't at all. It was really, really rare.
Your bubble is tight. All of a sudden it's like, hey, we're going to do a 5x5 insert movement, and you're like,
no thanks.
What about you?
I was very fortunate in my training career. If I look back at it now, the different people that had influences in my training, like even as early as, probably late middle school all the way through college. So in Baton Rouge, so Gail Hatch, if you guys have ever done like a Hatch cycle.
Oh, that really is a Baton Rouge thing?
So like he was a prominent weightlifting coach forever, and had spent minimal time with him. I wasn't like one of his weightlifters, but like had exposure to that. So I was introduced to
squatted heavy.
I was introduced to squatting and power cleaning at a very early age, like middle school. A guy named Gary Frank, who ended up being a football coach and our powerlifting coach, was the first guy ever to break 2,500 pounds. So you have Gail Hatch and you have Gary Frank, and then I go to college, and two guys, a guy named Doc. His name is Murdoch, but and then him and another gentleman, Kurt Woolfolk, who is Natalie Woolfolk's dad, who was an Olympian weightlifter, who is now Natalie Bergner. Her dad was one of my strength and conditioning coaches. So if I look back at all the people that I just by chance had, influenced my training throughout all of that, I had probably way more exposure to the Olympic lifts, more compound training, higher intensity workouts in my life. That's just up through college. What I really hadn't been exposed to at a very high level was that level of intensity. because I was largely a sport-specific athlete. Like, you wouldn't really need to do any of those things to play basketball.
Right.
So
You to be able to go for an hour.
Right, and that's where, so my wake-up call was, little to no gymnastics movements. I always joke at the level 1, like the first CrossFit workout I ever did was JT.
Right. All gymnastics.
Push, redundancy. That workout legitimately took me 37 minutes to get that done, which for the record, it's not a good time.
It's really bad.
Yeah. So that was where, but I wasn't, but then, the next day they're like, hey, heavy power cleans. And I'm like, yo, let's load that bad boy up.
145, let's go. Hey, you didn't tell us, how far did you drop in the regionals?
What do you mean drop?
You went from 2nd to not 6th.
Oh, I didn't qualify.
Yeah, but how far?
Oh, I think it was either 6 or 8. So I was either 7th or 9th.
So you missed it by 1.
I missed it by 1.
Because of those gymnastic movements.
Oh, I just didn't have capacity. It wasn't gymnastics. Because I could
fitness.
I was lacking fitness. Because I was pretty decent at both of those movements.
Well, snatching, like you said, you had some experience there. Yeah. The last part about variance, we kind of alluded to it. We talked about that there's criticisms to it. And that is, cool, you're never going to be great at anything. And like, whether it's Leadville or Tia Claire Toomey making the Olympics, like that's kind of non-existent anymore. We used to be Adam Klink, the first person to ever run a sub 5-minute mile and have a 500-pound back squat. And
I don't know if he's the first person ever. He's the first person that got highlighted in the CrossFit community.
But he very well may have been.
I doubt it, but let's just say it's not something that you see often.
Correct. Yeah. But nowadays, would you assume most male games athletes can do that?
No.
You don't think so?
I still think that's just outside the 500-pound back squat is big. That's big weight, dude. That's big weight.
Sure, but you think a portion every year could do it if tested?
Oh, I think you could pull. Let's just use
4
the whole.
or 5?
Open. Yeah, I think you could pull probably. You might be able to pull 10, maybe. I think 10 might be a stretch, but I think you could probably pull 5 people out of the full CrossFit ecosystem that could do that every year during the Open. Like if that was an event, you'd have you'd have. There would be some names on the leaderboard that had those numbers for sure.
Right. Point being, like. At one point, it was
But those
true.
are big. Yeah, I don't want to discount. They'd be like, oh, they can all do that. I'm like, I still don't think that's a thing. The point is it can be done, and because, again, you're talking about to back squat 500 pounds, like this is a mass moves mass thing now.
Well, take Roman. I bet you Roman. But then you have to be able to run that sub 5,
You got to be able to run the sub 5. But, like, because Adam's he's a big boy.
Yeah.
He's a big boy. He's always been really strong. So I do still think that is an incredible, like just outside the margins feat. However, here's what I would tell you. I think that if that was the goal presented to everybody inside of 6 months, you'd have hordes of people doing that.
For sure. But point being, this idea that, hey, you're never going to be great at anything, it's kind of like, we are actually pretty freaking good at most things.
Yeah, well, I think they've just dispelled that myth that to get competent or have respectable numbers for whatever it is that you're chasing, that you need to only be a specialist. I'm like, no, you can get really far being a generalist, like really far, like impressively far being a generalist.
And then the opposite of that is these sports-specific athletes are great at one thing.
Which is awesome.
Right, but you take that.
Dude, we were listening to this. So like, let's use long, slow distance. So just to give some context. So Kipchoge, right? 2 hours and 2 minutes marathon. Just for context, if this is how fast that is, okay? If you were to run the London Marathon, right? Gun goes off, you take off. And he was in Switzerland, and he took a flight from Switzerland, a 90-minute flight, and then took a 30-minute cab ride to the start of the race, he would then still beat you if you had an average marathon time.
It's not kind of fast.
Because the average marathon is like, it's about like 4 hours and some change. And be like, just for context, like how fast that is. He could start in a different country, take a plane ride and a taxi there, start the line, and he would still beat you in the race. That's how fast that is.
I always look at it where it's like, he runs... His marathon pace is faster than most of us can sprint a 400.
Yep.
I always joke, and I'm like, it's like, have either of you ever seen like world-class marathoners run, like in person? Mm-hmm. It looks like they're running from danger.
But
like,
calmly.
They're like, is there somebody chasing them? Like, are they in trouble? Like, what's happening? Like, that is the speed that they are running. It doesn't make sense.
Well, then the point being, you take this this person and you're like, cool, now let's watch them back squat. And you're like, 95 is going to destroy them. And then you take an Eddie Hall, who can deadlift 1,100 something pounds, ask him to go run a mile, and the joke we make is like, go get a sundial to time him. But so cool, like you, and again, not to discount these specials because that's freaking impressive. Both
No, quite the opposite. Not to discount it. Like those are amazing.
Celebrate
It's
them.
just highlighting that hey, there's a compromise, right? And if you're going to do that, don't be under, the delusion that you're not going to have to give up other things in order to have something that is that far over on the spectrum. Like you're going to have to give up a lot for that. Like you're gonna not have many other capacities if you want to deadlift 1,000 pounds.
Right.
Like there's just no way to get there.
And so like, because of that we want to have a balance, right? Our specialty is to specifically not specialize, right? And to make sure that I always use the example of like, if there was a natural disaster or the zombie apocalypse or something like that, whom are the people that I want in my corner to help take care of me, take care of my family, take care of themselves, take care of our community? I want the most well-rounded people that are capable to be able to do that. And how do we get there? We have variants in order to get that done. The more that we expose ourselves to, the more that we are able and capable of doing, and then it builds that, what you just mentioned, that broad, general, and inclusive fitness that allows for us to do whatever life throws at us. 'Cause
Unknown
that's
and unknowable.
The unknown and the unknowable. Whatever the thing is that's going to show up, we want to be able to just like, okay, I'm not going to be the best at that, but I can do it.
Yeah. And I think if you think about, I'm going to make some assumptions here about both of your training over the years because I know what mine has looked like, which is if you think about like what most people will kind of go through and what would be the actual path if you just like in a vacuum you made it up, like what would this person's fitness journey look like over a 15-year period in the CrossFit world? It'd be like, it would probably consist primarily of being a generalist with bouts of biasing. Like, hey, I'm going to focus a little bit more over here just to play with that and get a little bit more capacity, and then I'm going to come back and then put my focus back in the generalist bucket. I'm like, I'm going to go do a little bit more of this and go over here, and then I bring it back over here. And every time you do that, you bump the needle up just a little bit in your overall capacity, but it's all built on this base layer of just being a generalist, and I'm trying to get a little bit better at running, a little bit stronger, right? Maybe a little bit better at gymnastics.
But CrossFit's the magnet. It always pulls you back.
Pulls you back in because getting a little bit extra capacity in those other places, if you bring it back into this generalist bucket, it has bleed over into so many other things. You're like, oh shit, okay, this is how this works. And I see how that's how most people end up doing it. It's like, that's how mine's been. I've had all sorts of weird biased bouts over a 17-year period or whatever it is. And all of them had benefit to me, but it all came back to like, hey, you know what's probably best for me? Being a generalist.
And part of that is just like CrossFit's the most fun. Right? The community's fun.
Right.
Seeing yourself improve because it's measurable, observable, repeatable. It happens to get great results. So whatever those results you want, from biomarkers to a six-pack, CrossFit gets you there. We kick this off with the definition, constantly varied functional movements at high intensity. Now, that's a great definition, but what you should really do is, if someone asks you what CrossFit is, send them this podcast. Have them watch us talk about CrossFit for an hour and 20 minutes. That's the only answer these days.
That's it. There's nothing else.
Watch this podcast. And if you don't have time to watch this podcast,
ask them what they're doing tomorrow.
Get them into the box.
Get them into the gym.
Get them into the box because CrossFit is fun. It gets us the results we want. And oftentimes you're just surrounded by amazing people.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. We appreciate you listening and choosing to have us help you in your passion for coaching and affiliate ownership. You can find more episodes just like this on all podcast platforms. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to us on any social media platforms, or you can visit www.besthouroftheirday.com to book a call. If you found this episode helpful for you, please share it so that we can help other coaches and affiliate owners to help build a bigger and stronger CrossFit community. Thanks for listening.